What would you do if strangers not only trespassed on your land but treated it like their own personal campground? Complete with campfires, loud music, and a sense of entitled arrogance? In today's story, the protagonist's response is a masterclass in how to handle it, delivering a lesson in consequences that the trespassers would never forget. My name is Wayne, and I live in a small town in the heart of the Midwest. Here, people tend to keep to themselves, and it's rare to have any disagreements with the locals. Any real confrontation I can remember has always been with people from out of the county, or even out of state. There's a university not too far from my land, so seeing unfamiliar faces isn't unusual. But they generally steer clear of us locals. That is, until two entitled students from that university decided to pay my property a visit. I'm what you'd call an outdoorsman. I live for fishing, hunting, camping, and hiking, and I'm fortunate enough to do a lot of it on my own land. I have a couple of ponds and a good-sized forest where I do most of my hunting, primarily for waterfowl and deer. To that end, I have a permanent duck blind set up on one pond and a deer stand near the edge of the forest, both of which are somewhat visible from the road if you know what you're looking for. Around here, it's mostly farmland. There isn't a lot of public land for recreation. So naturally, some people are willing to push their luck to find a place to enjoy the outdoors on my land, whether I want them to or not. It was late September, maybe early October, and I was on my way to scout one of my ponds for waterfowl season. As I pulled up to the property line, I saw a Subaru Outback parked off the side of the road, squarely on my land. I didn't recognize the car, which was the first red flag, and the California plates confirmed my suspicion. I got out of my truck to investigate. The car was empty. Then, a smell hit my nostrils: smoke. Something was burning, and the smell was coming from my forest. I grabbed a shovel from my truck bed and ran toward the woods. As I got closer, I could also hear the thumping of some awful, tinny music. And there they were. Two of them. They had pitched a tent and had a campfire roaring like it was their own private resort. I was speechless. How could anyone have the sheer gall to not only trespass but to set up a full-blown campsite? I walked right up to them, and they were so absorbed in their vibe that they didn't even notice me. I reached down and shut off their music. They both looked up at me, their faces a perfect picture of disbelief. After a moment of dead silence, the first one, who I'll call Chad, spoke up. "Hey man, why did you do that?" he whined. "You really killed our vibe." His friend, Leo, chimed in. "Yeah dude. Get lost." I kept my voice even. "Hello. Please vacate the premises immediately." Chad just stared at me. "Why? This is private land," I explained. "You need permission from the landowner to be here." Then Leo, with astounding ignorance, asked, "Can we have permission?" "No." "Why?" he pressed. "I use this land for hunting," I said, my patience wearing thin. "Now, get the hell off my property." That triggered Chad. "You're a murderer," he sneered. "Killing defenseless animals." "I really do not give a damn, bud," I shot back. "Now vacate before I have your Subaru towed." That threat must have finally penetrated their stoned minds, because they started to pack up their gear. I stood there and escorted them off my land, making sure they didn't wander. But before they left, Chad turned to me with a smug look. "We will return," he declared. "And we will stop your senseless killings." Chad made that threat with a smug sense of righteousness, completely unaware that this single promise would lead directly to his own spectacular downfall. I just laughed, told them to have a good day, and went to assess the damage. It was worse than I thought. The idiots had cut down several young, living trees for their fire, completely ignoring all the deadfall nearby. I found a mess of empty beer cans and, sitting on a tree stump, a single marijuana roach. I detest drug use, and seeing that on my land really pissed me off. This kind of blatant disrespect isn't just a one-off thing. It's a problem many rural landowners face. As one commenter on my story later noted, coming from a ranching family in New Mexico, they dealt with it constantly. Hunters there would assume all land was public, cutting fences, shooting livestock and water tanks, leaving trash, and even starting fires. He said he grew up hating deer hunters because of it. And his grandmother even resorted to planting nail boards to stop the trespassers. Finding their trash and destroyed trees on my own land, I understood that anger perfectly. Chad's threat about coming back to stop me sparked an idea. I knew exactly the spot he was talking about, an open area where my friends and I have done some light off-roading in the past. I had been planning to convert that very area back to native prairie grass anyway. So, I got to work preparing it. I took about 200 meters of barbed wire and staked it out in a grid pattern across the field, right where I intended to plant the grass seed later. Then I just left it and waited. The next few weeks were quiet. Fast forward to late October. I was in my duck blind with a few buddies. We'd had a good morning, bagging our limit of pheasants, and figured we'd try for some ducks in the afternoon. A flock of geese landed right in our decoys. A beautiful sight. We decided not to shoot, just to watch them for a bit. And then we heard it, loud, obnoxious music getting closer. It was Chad and Leo. I watched as their Subaru turned off the road, drove right past my no trespassing signs, and headed straight for the off-roading area. I calmly informed my buddies about my recent prairie grass project, and we all started to chuckle as the Subaru disappeared into the tall grass where I'd laid my trap. Their blaring music had already scared off the geese, which was irritating enough. A minute passed. Suddenly, their engine cut out, and the music died with it. Silence. We looked at each other, left the blind, and walked over to investigate. What we saw was a thing of pure, unadulterated beauty. The Subaru was dead in its tracks. Most, if not all, of the 200 meters of barbed wire I had staked out was gone, sucked up and mangled completely around the car's axles and undercarriage. It was a spiderweb of steel and rubber. Chad was outside the car, absolutely freaking out, while Leo was on the ground, trying to assess the catastrophic damage. When they saw us approaching, Chad immediately started screaming at me, threatening to sue me for damaging his vehicle. I just laughed in his face. "Get off my damn land before I call law enforcement," I told him. He laughed back, mockingly. "You should." He dared me. "I want you to." This was the masterstroke. By calling two different branches of law enforcement, each with their own jurisdiction and authority, I wasn't just reporting a crime. I was weaving a legal net so perfectly constructed that the trespassers had no chance of escaping. I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. First, to the sheriff, reporting trespassers who were refusing to leave. Second, to our local conservation officer, or CO. I told the CO I had non-hunters actively harassing hunters and wildlife. Hearing that, he practically got a hard-on and promised to be there within the hour. The sheriff showed up in just 10 minutes. I let Chad and Leo tell their side of the story first. They spun a tale about how I had given them permission to be there and had then intentionally destroyed their car. The sheriff listened patiently, then looked at me. "Do they have your permission to be here?" he asked. "No, sir. They do not," I replied. "And I suspect they might be under the influence of something. Because no logical person would drive through a field clearly marked with barbed wire." The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Why do you think that?" "The last time they trespassed," I said, "they left behind empty beer cans and a marijuana roach." The sheriff's eyes gleamed. He turned to Chad and Leo. "Empty your pockets. I'm searching the car." The search of the car turned up nothing. Chad's pockets were empty, too. But then Leo just started crying. He had pot on him. So, on top of trespassing, Leo was now cited for possession of illegal drugs. The sheriff then informed them it was their problem to figure out how to get their disabled vehicle off my land and offered them a ride back to the university to sort it out. Just then, at the perfect moment, the CO arrived. I explained that they had trespassed and, in the process, their loud music and driving had harassed both us hunters and the wildlife. Hunter harassment laws in my state are open to interpretation. But the CO agreed this was a clear violation. He issued both of them 3 tickets each for harassing hunters, a misdemeanor charge that came with over $5,000 in fines. As an afterthought, I mentioned they had also cut down my trees during their last visit. Leo, still sniffling, immediately pointed at Chad. "That wasn't me. That was him." And just like that, Chad was also charged with destruction of property. My buddies and I were laughing our asses off as the sheriff loaded the 2 of them into his car and drove them away. It's a shame I didn't press the tree issue further. As a commenter later pointed out, under what's known as tree law, you can sue for treble damages. Cutting down even a few young trees could have resulted in a civil penalty of $20,000 or more. A few days passed without a word. Then, I received a letter in the mail. It was from Chad, formally asking for written permission to come retrieve his vehicle from my land. He included his phone number. I gave him a call. "Hello?" he answered. "I'm calling about your request for permission to retrieve your vehicle." I said, "Yes." He replied, "Permission denied. You can, however, have someone retrieve it on your behalf." "What?" "There's a local towing service you can call." I explained calmly. "You are not to set foot on my land again." He swore at me and hung up. The next day, I got a call from the towing service. I gave the driver permission, with the strict condition that Chad was not allowed on my property. I met the tow truck and led the driver to the mangled Subaru. It took the poor guy 2 grueling hours to untangle the car from its barbed wire bed. Chad, who was waiting by the road, grew increasingly impatient, telling the driver to hurry up, which only pissed the driver off. This revealed Chad's greatest fatal flaw, his arrogant entitlement, believing the world owed him service. A flaw that would ultimately leave him stranded and humiliated. When the driver finally got the Subaru onto the road, Chad started cussing him out. The driver just looked at him. "You know what?" he said. "I'm not going to charge you for this." He then unhooked the Subaru, left it sitting right there on the shoulder of the road, got in his truck, and drove off. I was laughing like a madman. Chad got in his car, and while the engine would turn on, the vehicle wouldn't budge. The axles were completely shot. He had a full-on meltdown, screaming and kicking his tires before finally calling Leo to come pick him up. I stayed right there to make sure there was no more trouble. As they drove away, Chad spat on my car. They just left the disabled Subaru sitting on the road. Once they were gone, I made one last call to law enforcement to report a vehicle illegally parked and abandoned on a public road. I gave them the location. And an hour later, a different tow truck was hauling Chad's Subaru away to the impound lot. I never heard from those two assholes again. This story is a powerful reminder that respecting private property isn't just a suggestion. It's a fundamental rule. When you arrogantly intrude on someone's land, you're not just trespassing. You're inviting consequences you are not prepared to handle. Don't mess with a man's land. So, what do you think? Was the barbed wire a step too far? Or a perfectly measured response to their threats and disrespect? Let me know in the comments.